Good morning and welcome to the Point. After more than 2 weeks and much consternation in Washington, lawmakers and the president have agreed on a plan that has reopened government from a partial shutdown and made sure the country can borrow money to pay its bills at least until early next year. On Wednesday, after the deal was announced, but before it was voted on, we talked with 3 Michigan lawmakers. Longtime senior U.S. Senator Carl Levin from Michigan, as well as another longtime serving member over in the House, Republican Fred Upton, and a member of that new part of the Republican Party you'll hear a lot about on this morning's program, Justin Amash. Here's what they had to say about the potential problems and potential solutions.
We need some leadership from Speaker Boehner. We need him to do what he's been unwilling to do so far, which is to tell 20 or 30 pretty extreme folks in his caucus, sorry, compromise requires that people each give something. You folks have been unwilling to give anything. I'm going to proceed without you.
Senator, you spend a lot of time on Capitol Hill. You've been there through a number of different presidents and different incarnations and makeups of the Senate and the House. Compare this last 3 weeks and the situation that we're in right now to the rest of your experience in Washington. Is this the most unusual situation that you have seen?
It is, and the reason is that usually there are moderate Republicans and enough Democrats who will work together to compromise. And in this case, we now have a kind of a new phenomenon in this country, which is we have a minority of a minority. The Tea Party minority of the Republican Party, which has basically scared the moderate Republicans into being unwilling to compromise. And the fear is that if they do, that they will then face a Tea Party primary. That has been a debilitating feature of this last few years. Hopefully, again, Speaker Boehner will be willing to take this on. But it is a fairly new phenomenon that you have a small minority, a relatively small minority in a large party, in this case the Republican Party, that has been so dominant, so controlling, and so uncompromising.
You know Speaker Boehner well. There have been a lot of people that have called into question his ability to lead over in the House of Representatives. What's your take on him as a speaker and how he's performed over these last 3 weeks?
Well, you know, his hand is what it is. Our margin is only 30-some votes, 232 to 200, I think, is the count in the House. So if he loses just 15 or 16, he doesn't have the votes to win. And we've tried a lot of different outcomes here, from a complete repeal of Obamacare to a 1-year delay to Keystone Pipeline. I mean, we've had everything, including the kitchen sink, in just about every version, and we still can't get the votes for some reason or another to try and get something done. So, as he looks at it, obviously he's very frustrated.
Rick, it looks like we're going to get another political deal. The two sides had a chance to come to some agreement. I think we should have been working on this for months rather than at the last second. And it looks like we're going to get another deal that kicks the can down the road, doesn't really make any real compromises, and leaves the fight to another day. We have to get our budget under control, and what we're going to get today isn't going to do that. So a lot of changes have to be made, and unfortunately neither side seems prepared to make those changes at this time.
Obviously, there are a lot of different opinions in Washington about exactly how and why the shutdown happened, how we got so close to what some think was a debt limit, and where we're going from here. After everything had been passed, the president had signed off, and government had reopened. We talked with U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow about the events of the past 2 weeks and what happens next.
Well, Rick, it is a relief, but I have to say this was reckless and irresponsible. It was a manufactured crisis. We want to focus on manufacturing jobs, but it is at this point at least a reprieve. We will have the opportunity now to finally come together to negotiate a final budget. I'm a senior member of the Budget Committee, and I'm looking forward to opportunities here to come together and develop a long-term plan that brings some certainty for businesses and families and tackles the debt and addresses investments in education innovation. We have to get that done by December 13th, and then by into the new year on the 15th, we have to address the year-long budget, and then the whole question of default again begins to kick in after February 7th. So this is a short-term reprieve. There's no reason that we should be in this kind of manufactured crisis. The yearly deficit's been cut in half. We've put in place $2.5 trillion in long-term debt reduction already. We can do more, but this didn't need to happen.
Senator, I wonder, and I'm not putting words in your mouth, but I wonder, as you and Senator Murray get together with Congressman Ryan and your counterparts over there, just where you find the common ground. Washington, from this observer's standpoint, is fractured. The kind of language and rhetoric we heard, frankly, from both sides in Washington, does not sound like a conducive place to get an agreement on what you would have for lunch, much less on what you're going to spend over the coming year. How realistic is it to get that kind of a deal?
Well, we have to for the good of the country. First of all, let me say that as chair of the Agriculture Committee, you know that I've worked very hard and successfully to bring Democrats and Republicans together because we wanted to solve a problem. We wanted to make sure there was agricultural policy and conservation policy and nutrition policy for the country for the next 5 years. And so we came together. And that, by the way, is in a final conference committee with the House right now, which is a good thing. So when people want to solve problems, they can. Where I would actually disagree, Rick, is this isn't a question of both sides. This is a minority of the minority. It's a group of folks who were elected on an agenda to shut the government down. They think it was great that the government was shut down. They would have liked to have seen it shut down longer. These are folks that lost at the polls. The democratic process didn't work for them because they didn't get a majority of the vote. So now they're trying other means to get around the democracy and to threaten to shut the government down if they don't get what they want. You know, I'm not shutting the government down because we haven't got a farm bill for 2 years, even though all of our farmers in West Michigan are desperate to get long-term certainty on a farm bill. I'm not going to threaten the full faith and credit of the United States of America in order to get that. I'm going to keep working through the democratic process.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, because the President of the United States has put that out as one of his major policy initiatives that he wants to get done. He says he wants to get it done this year. Now, of the things he was talking about, this one is the furthest down the road because it has passed over in the Senate and it is over in the House. And if I understand this, conferees have been appointed. So all of that must sound like progress to you.
It does sound like progress. The House has actually passed a bill. It's very different. It's not as good for Michigan as the one we passed in the Senate, but they did pass a bill. That's progress. We're now in what's called a conference committee, which, as you know, negotiates differences between the House and Senate. Speaker says he'll take it up in the House. When we get that done, we know we'll be able to pass it in the Senate. So it is progress. I mean, the truth of the matter is, when you get beyond the folks, who just want to tear things down, and, it's a lot easier to tear down the barn than it is to build a new one. It takes more time, more effort to build things up. But that's our job, is not to tear things down, stop things. It's to build things up and come together to solve problems. So we'll do that on the Farm Bill. We need to do that on a budget. We need to complete the task of deficit reduction, and we need to create jobs. We need to keep creating a situation where businesses can create jobs. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Back to the budget process, and it's interesting to me because you're going to have a front row seat at both of these very important negotiations, both on the budget and on the Farm Bill. But if we can go back to the budget for a minute, I know you don't want to negotiate that budget with me on this interview, so I'm not going to try to do that, but I do want to ask a little bit about where this goes, because obviously Republicans are going to continue what one of their demands has been all along. They want to do something about spending. The president has talked about entitlement reform, and there has also been the conversation about additional revenues. Somewhere along the way, coming up with some more cash flow. Are all of those things part of this negotiation? Is that a fair way to look at this?
Yes, I mean, we need to bring it all together. We've already put in place spending caps, so spending is growing at much slower rates. We've put in place $2.5 trillion of the $4 trillion. That was the goal for deficit reduction. So we've got to do the next $1.5 trillion. That does involve closing loopholes that are causing some folks and some businesses to pay no taxes, while others are certainly paying more than their fair share. So we need to close loopholes, bring jobs back from overseas. That creates revenue and a more level playing field. And then we do need to tackle Social Security and Medicare for the future. But there's two different views. One is that I share is strengthen it for the future. And the other would say, we don't like Medicare and Social Security, and so we want to either radically change it to a voucher system or ideally eliminate it. So I think that's the toughest point. If we can agree that Medicare and Social Security are great American success stories and that we need to strengthen them for the future, then we need to find ways to be able to do that. And there are a number of ways to do that if we can get everybody to agree that this is about protecting Social Security and Medicare, not eliminating them.
Senator, it would be my observation after years of interviewing you and talking to you about government that you are generally a pretty optimistic person. I also know that you've served at the state level, you've served over in the House of Representatives, and you've served in the United States Senate. In fact, you will soon be the senior senator from Michigan. Give me your honest assessment of how realistic it is to get to some kind of a deal before we start hearing people becoming concerned about another government shutdown and another game of dodgeball when it comes to default.
Well, first of all, I hope that the disaster that was created, we lost $24 billion in our economy, families, businesses, economic opportunity lost because of what just happened. I'm hopeful that there will not be games again with the full faith and credit of the United States of America or shutting down government services. I think that getting a long-term budget deal is tough, frankly, and it will depend on sort of putting the fringes aside and people being willing to come to the middle and listen to each other and do something that's in the best interest of the country, not some extreme agenda. I mean, the truth is we have a group of folks who have been elected in the last couple of elections who have an agenda to shut the government down, who have an agenda that is very much out of the mainstream. They are not the majority of the Republican Party, but so far have been somehow capturing them and controlling them. So we need our friends, our reasonable Republicans and joining with reasonable Democrats, and then we can get something done. We did it on the Farm Bill. We can do it, but it does mean that folks are going to have to step away from the extremes and be willing to look at something that is in the mainstream of America.
That is one point of view when it comes to where we're going with a new budget deal that has yet to be drawn up. There is another point of view, too. That comes from Republican Congressman Bill Huizenga. He's next. To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. In the first part of the program, you heard two U.S. senators from Michigan on one level or another blaming what they believe are extremists in the Republican Party for the recent partial government shutdown. Now, Congressman Bill Huizenga talks about why he voted no for the plan that passed on Wednesday and what he expects to happen next. Congressman, let's talk about where we are, how we got there, where you think we're going to go. But first, I want to ask you a question, because in the first part of this program, we heard both of the Democratic senators, the U.S. senators from the state, talk about the minority of the minority, and we've heard the talk about fringe. At the end of the day, you were one of 140 plus Republicans who voted against the deal that came about. Does that make you part of the minority or the fringe?
That's a great talking point on their end. I think that what it is you've got a group of people that are concerned about the direction and, frankly, the way that this last deal was put together. Everybody wanted it to end. The question is, are we going to have these unconditional debt increases without any sort of substantial, substantive, significant changes? And that's where I drew the line. And frankly, the people that wrote the law, the people that voted for the law, are now unwilling to live under the provisions of that law. And that to me is unacceptable, and I heard that loud and clear from the people of Michigan as well.
And when you say that law, you speak of the Affordable Care Act?
The Affordable Care Act, quote unquote Obamacare. Look, they all knew what was in it. That was a Senate amendment that was put in place. And I think the cynicism that continues to get built up between the American people and government is because of those kinds of things. And that to me is a pretty fundamental element.
I need not tell you that it didn't take long as this process started. A week out, we started to hear about the possibility of a shutdown. Then a weekend, people were saying when it's going to be over. And 2 weeks in, they're up against the debt ceiling. The poll numbers did not play well for Republicans anywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, some places maybe a little better than others, but by and large, Republicans, at least in the court of public opinion, and at least for now, took it on the chin. Was it worth it?
Well, we got beat, there's no doubt. And when you have an unwilling dance partner with Harry Reid in the Senate who said absolutely no negotiations, it makes it very, very difficult. And I think, frankly, there's some of my friends on the right that were surprised at some of the directions that conservatives were willing to go, moving off of total defunding to saying, hey, let's hit the pause button here for a year because it has significant issues, to saying, hey, if we're going to do this for the employer mandate side, why not the individual mandate side? All the way down to saying, hey, why don't you live by the law the way that it was written so that members of Congress and their staff are going to have to live under it and live in those exchanges. And to have every single one of those and a number of others in between rejected, with all the time saying, we're not going to negotiate with, hostages or hostage takers, arsonists, zealots. I mean, the rhetoric was absolutely amazing. Makes it very difficult to cut through that and actually make real progress.
We can talk more about the process. We can talk more about where we've been, but I am very interested in where we're going because when I talked with you both on Wednesday night and again on Thursday morning, you had significant questions, concerns. I will say that that's the way I saw them, about what happens on December 13th and January 15th and February 7th, because what this deal does is simply moves to new deadlines, and the idea is that Senator Stabenow, who was just on, along with Senator Murray, will go with Congressman Ryan, who you know very well, and they'll try to talk about the budget, try to put something together. I ask out loud in the story that I did on Thursday, why will in 60 days the same group of people who haven't been able to do anything for multiple years be able to pull this off? Is there some reason to believe that it can happen now?
I think if you looked up kicking the can down the road in a thesaurus, this would be Exhibit A. I mean, here we go again, and I'm not convinced that this short-term deal certainly didn't do it, and I'm not convinced that this whatever the next step is going to be able to solve these long-term problems because we're not using long-term solutions. You've got people that aren't willing to look, further down the road than the next 3 months, the next election cycle. We've got to get serious about how we're going to deal with our spending and the debt, this mountain of debt that's getting piled on our kids. And obviously, I'm very concerned about the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And by the way, to say the exchanges have had glitches is very charitable and generous nonetheless. It's not just about the parameters of it. There's security issues that are surrounding it. So it's not just whether people can log on or not. It's going to be what's going to be happening to their information and exposed. So there's some deep, deep questions that need to be answered, and I'm not convinced that the structure that came up with is going to allow us to get to those long-term things. It might have solved it very, very short-term. It opened up government, which again I wanted to do as well, which is why I voted over 20 times to fund pieces of the government like WIC, like National Institutes of Health, like making sure that it's something as petty as opening up the World War II Memorial after they had closed it down, that we were able to take care of those things. I think that's what people expect out of their government.
I don't want to get too far off the beaten path, and I asked you about this on one of our earlier interviews, but I wonder if Republicans, maybe you included, maybe not, are second guessing the idea of going into this shutdown. And again, the blame can lie wherever through one's political prism you would like to place it. The point is that by having all of the focus of the media on the government shutdown on October 1st, some of those glitches that you talked about with the Affordable Care Act, which have been considerable, as admitted to by the White House and virtually everybody in government, didn't become the issue. Did you lose a talking point as Republicans by being in a government shutdown when the Affordable Care Act's exchanges came online?
Yeah, I don't view it as a talking point, and I guess it's maybe semantics, but it's another example of it not working, and that I think that did get lost in there, and sort of the thicket of the stories was more about the shutdown than the actual problems as they were trying to roll that out. So, absolutely, I think that hindsight being 20/20, there's a lot of things that I certainly would have done different had I had the ability to control that. I think our leadership is at that point as well.
I don't have a reset button, but if I did, and if I could go to Washington and push that reset button and say, your short-term memory is now gone, and all those things that this side said about this side and this side said about this side, and these people said about the president said about these people, that's all, you've all forgotten that. There are still a number of issues that are left. Entitlement reform that the president has talked about and Republicans have talked about. When they say those words, they sound the same, but they mean different things. The budget and balancing the budget and long-term spending. Everybody says they want to work on that, but they mean different things. A full budget deal from a Republican perspective would involve less spending. A full budget deal from the standpoint of the Democrats would include more revenues. The reform of entitlements would probably entail more revenues. How likely is it, given that reset button doesn't really exist, how likely is it that you can get someplace where everybody can start saying, yes, I think we have a path?
Well, I'll add one in on that, and I think we saw that in the last 2 days as Harry Reid and others were coming back. It's really about the spending. They don't like the sequester cuts, the across-the-board cuts, not just because of the way that it was implemented. I'm not a huge fan of that either. It's like going into your garden and saying, well, we're just going to whack everything off at 18 inches and say that we just weeded the garden. Well, you just took out the beans and the corn as well as those weeds. We'd be better to go in and dig out individually. But it's not about just the implementation of it. They don't like the number. They don't like the fact that for 2 years in a row, since the first time since the end of the Korean War, 2 years in a row we've seen government spending go down in real terms. That is what they don't like. And suddenly, when you had Susan Collins and Joe Manchin working on a deal that would have preserved the sequester cuts, the spending levels, and reshuffle them, but preserve those numbers, that suddenly became unacceptable to Harry Reid and a number of his other colleagues. So I think that we're finally seeing the real tip of the iceberg here for them, which is they want to see an expansion of government and an expansion of spending, not a contraction of that. So that is going to be very difficult philosophically. How do you get there? Because it's not about partisanship. It is about philosophical differences, though. The proper size, role, and scope of government, and whether it's TARP, whether it's the Affordable Care Act, whether it's our spending levels, it's all going to play into it. And this is going to be a tough couple of years.
Lawmakers in Washington have until mid-December to come up with a long-term spending plan, even though the continuing resolution goes until the middle of January. As for that debt limit, look for that to expire on February 7th if they don't come up with a deal. I'll have a final thought when we come back to the point. So for now, the partial government shutdown is over. There will be negotiations on a longer-term spending bill and trying to figure out what to do with that debt limit. But can they get it done? And if they do, can they do it by the middle of December or the middle of January or the 1st of February? That's what we'll be watching between now and the beginning of 2014. And I hope you'll join us every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.